What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a kind of a quick overview of what it means to be an exchequer. And then some of the points and things that I bring up, the rest of my team will do a deep dive into some of those primary topics. And then I'll also go over, before we do that deep dive, kind of a glossary of terms, some of the terminology that we use here in the SCA and accounting wise that might help you understand the rest of the training. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And let me see if I can get to. All right. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, so as you can see, we're going to do an overview of the roles and responsibilities of an exchequer. So, the exchequer position, it actually is a very honorable position. You are being trusted with your branch's assets, management of their financial stability, and record keeping. And record keeping is very important. So being entrusted with the financial well-being of your branch is a big responsibility. And you are valued and respected for stepping into this role. And I took this out of the Exchequer handbook, but it really spoke to me as, I think a lot of times we don't realize how important exchequers are. You can't have a branch without one. So I really liked this little opening here. All right, so I thought this was fun too. I've got 3 definitions of what it is to what an exchequer is, right? So in the modern world, it is a term that is still used, and it refers to the account in which the tax receipts and other public monies are paid. Historically, it was a government officer who was responsible for collecting revenue, making payments, auditing official accounts, and trying legal cases related to revenue, and reporting to the sovereign. And in the SCA, we use it as a noun, although often I use it as a verb as well. But exchequer is a noun. It refers to the financial officer of an SCA branch, guild, or other entity. The exchequer is responsible for all the financial activity and record retention. You'll notice I keep bringing up record retention. And the exchequer leads the branch financial committee, generally carrying 1 vote in deciding financial matters. So the requirements to hold office as an exchequer, you have to have an active membership, and you have to be of legal majority age for the area in which you live. Sometimes that can vary by state. Must have access. You have to have electronic access at the very least to the Kingdom website, which will give you access to Kingdom law, financial policy, the newsletter. Oftentimes the newsletter does provide updates to things within the Kingdom that you may need to be aware of. You also have to be acceptable to the Crown and the Kingdom Exchequer. You cannot hold any other offices. I know that's hard sometimes with smaller branches. In some occasions, variances have been granted to hold more than 1 office, but they're few and far between, and it would have to be a pretty special case. You also cannot live in the same residence with any other signer on your bank account. So it doesn't matter whether you're married or not, or just roommates. If you cannot reside in the same household, and you may not be royalty or landed baronage. So in addition, these are just not necessarily requirements, but good skill sets to have to be a successful exchequer is you have to be neutral. You have to be willing to work with everyone and avoid those personal conflicts. That's probably one of the hardest parts of the job when you're working within your own branch where everybody knows everybody, and there are definite personal conflicts. So that's where your conflict resolution with impartiality and leadership skills really come into play. You must maintain an active warrant at all times. You have to be willing to learn and follow the rules and attend regular trainings. All right, so for our new exchequers here, your first duties when assuming office would be, of course, to apply for a warrant. I believe all of you have. You need to update the signers on your branch bank accounts, and I have a little bit more about that coming up here. You should review the financial records that are turned over to you, and they should be turned over to you. You should have an emergency deputy. That's really critical. I've had a couple of branches this year that kind of imploded, and there were no emergency deputies for any of the greater officers. And those branches ended up going into suspension. So it's really important that you do have somebody who can take over if an emergency were to happen. Review the Exchequer handbook. There's tons of information in there on how to do your job, how to approach things. I'm not going to tell you to read it cover to cover. It's a pretty big tome, many hundreds of pages, but it's a really good resource for you. And then another thing that you should be doing when you take over is you should be contacting Kingdom to arrange for a book review. And the book review is basically where we go over all of your records, everything that you have in place. And it's a great tool for helping you determine any disconnects that happened in the past and what you need to do moving forward. Looking at the book review checklist, it shows you really what the expectation is of you as an exchequer. So in some ways, it's probably the best job description you can find is by going over that book review and looking at all the things that are supposed to be checked off. And those are all the things that you as an exchequer are supposed to be doing or to have retained for your records. There's actually a copy of the book review checklist on the Kingdom website under Exchequer resources. And we have come up with ways to do them virtually. It's a little awkward because it involves scanning stuff back and forth, but it can be done. Okay, so changing signers on your bank account. This is probably one of the most frustrating things that branches go through. There's a number of steps that need to be involved because what we have found is the bank may have requirements, the SCA has requirements, and those two don't always jive. The bank does not care about the SCA's requirements, but we really do care. So the very first step to change signers is you should have your financial committee vote to approve those signers. Your meeting minutes should show who those signers are, and you should use legal names. Though one of those signers does need to be a representative of Kingdom or your principality or another designee. Some of the more like areas in the inlands, we've appointed designees as to be the Kingdom rep. So once you've done that, then you should also, or concurrently, contact your banker. Find out from the bank what their requirements are to change those signers because they'll have very specific requirements. You also need to send a bank request form. And on that form, that's where you are notifying and requesting authorization from SCA Corporate to make these changes to the signers on your account. So you need to fill out the form completely. You should be noting who you're keeping, who you're adding, and who you're removing. And membership expiration dates. This is a biggie. You really need to make sure that anybody you're adding to the account, that their expiration of their membership date is more than 60 days out. And the reason why is because it actually can take that long to complete the process. So once you send the bank request form, also there's a copy of the current form on the Kingdom website and Society's website. You send that to me, Kingdom Exchequer. I review it. I send it to the Society Exchequer. She sends it over to Renee, who will then send a corporate resolution authorizing the changes directly to your bank. Now, this is just for U.S. banks. Insofar as let me qualify this. All Ontarian branches, U.S. or Canada, follow these first 4 steps. But U.S. banks will only get the corporate resolution from Society. Canadian banks, what you will get will be an email from me, possibly an email directly from Society authorizing you to make those changes. And that is because Canadian banks don't really care about our corporate authorization. They don't want to see it. It confuses them. So either way, some sort of authorization is going to come your way to make those changes, whether it's coming from me for a Canadian branch or whether it's coming from Society. And lately, the last dozen changes I've done, Society has actually emailed a copy of that form to the branch exchequer as well. They used to never do that. So you shouldn't be left in the dark. If more than a couple weeks goes by and you haven't heard back, please ping me. Once I send those things off to Society, they kind of drop off my radar. I'm not tracking them anymore because the ball's in Society's court. So please do let me know if it's languishing out there. Sometimes I have to remind them to push things along. So once you have your authorization from Society or from Kingdom for Canadian branches, then you can coordinate the signing of those of the new signature cards. During COVID, I found that branches are a lot more willing to work with us than they were prior to COVID. Some branches want everybody to come in all at once to sign the card. That's very difficult, especially if the Kingdom rep is on the other side of the state or in a different state. But lately they've been just a lot more willing. What I try to do is set up a drive-by signing where we agree that everybody's going to come in on a specific day based on their own schedules. And that way everybody rolls in one 24-hour period and signs the card. Many banks are willing to do that if they're not willing to actually mail the card direct. Sometimes they will. Just depends. Some banks are easier to work with than others as well. So this can be a very aggravating process. Please reach out if you're having a hard time or your bank's giving you a hard time, and we'll do whatever we can to help you through it. All right. So your regular duties, as we've mentioned, you have the management and oversight of all branch funds, assets, and financial records. One of your duties is informing the financial committee and the populace of the status of all branch assets, monetary and non-monetary. You're required to reconcile your bank accounts monthly. And you reimburse valid receipts, but you also deny requests for improper invalid receipts. So don't be afraid to tactfully decline a reimbursement request if it's not in line with an already approved officer budget, or if your financial committee hasn't approved it, or if it's not allowed per SCA policy. And we'll go into a lot more of that in the subsequent presentations. You're supposed to, provide communication with your superior, the financial committee, and your populace that is effective. So if you're communicating with people and you're getting constant questions about a thing, I think I would be looking at the way you're presenting it. Obviously, it's not effective if people are constantly asking you questions about the same topic. You need to maintain meeting minutes or notes from financial committee meetings, including those meetings that occur outside of the regular financial committee. Sometimes you'll have discussions. Your next financial committee meeting isn't until next month. A decision needs to be made now. You need to take notes of that and then actually read those decisions into the minutes of the next formal meeting of the financial committee. You're supposed to comply with any corporate requirements. I mean, there's standard requirements, and sometimes we get special requests from society to supply documentation and those types of things. You are expected to participate and cooperate with book reviews regularly. We have been really lax with those. I really do want to start doing them because they're probably the best training tool around. You are expected to preserve the reputation of the SCA by paying all of your branch debts promptly. You're expected to protect the tax-exempt status of the SCA. Accurate and timely reporting to the branch financial committee and to Kingdom. And basically your reporting timeline is within 30 days of the end of each calendar quarter. That's when it's due to Kingdom. And around that time, you should be reporting the quarterly report up to your seneschal and coronets if you have them. You're responsible for the annual budgeting of officer expenses, tracking and maintaining non-cash assets. That would be all of your equipment, regalia, all of that. You sometimes some branches break that out and have a chamberlain. And chamberlains are deputies to the Exchequer and should be warranted. Ensure that all financial transactions are conducted with transparency. That is also one of the most important things, is being transparent. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and just and some of the phrases we use to define how people can get about money. And then, of course, use common sense and be ethical in your decision making. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We have a handbook, but it doesn't cover every single situation that's going to come your way. So you can always ask questions of me or neighboring exchequers who may have also experienced these same types of issues. And that was it for this. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. That's it for this one. Let me get my other presentation up here. Any questions before I move on to anything else?
One thing to break in, the Facebook group is a wealth and a treasure trove of information.
Thank you. Thank you. I forget about Facebook all the time. Yeah.
And for those of you,
so.
yeah, for those of you who are on the Facebook, you will get a reminder. Let's see, Thursday, that it's the end of Q1 and that your reports are due in 30 days, probably by me. Just saying.
Thank you. I really appreciate you doing that, Trent, because I forget, and then I see Master Torquil's reminder and go, oh, yeah, that's right. So thank you.
Can we get a copy of this presentation?
Oh, certainly, certainly. Yeah, what would be the best way to get that out?
I would say we will combine all the PowerPoints into a folder, and I will just share them.
Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, so I've got a glossary of phrases and terms to review with you guys. Let me see if I can get this to the full screen. Okay. All right, so in the Exchequer handbook, there's probably like 6 or 7 pages of terms and definitions. That's a great resource. We've kind of pulled out some that we think are important. I actually added in a few more last night too. All right, so the accounting equation is assets equals liabilities plus equity. Assets are all items in the branch that are worth something, such as cash, non-cash inventory of any value, equipment, and regalia. All of those make up the assets of your branch. Liabilities, these are the things that are owed by your branch, such as deferred revenue, payables, things that will lower your assets if you pay them out, which is why we deduct them from the assets to determine equity. Double entry accounting. This is the accounting that we do in the SCA. It's pretty standard accounting. So for every transaction, there are 2 entries, right? The first entry is the cash in or cash out of your bank account. Pretty easy peasy. The second entry is we take whatever that income or expense is and we apply a value and a category to it, whether it's event income or general supplies. And so that's the 2 entries. Journal. So we also known as a general ledger or just a ledger. Sometimes it's essentially your checkbook register. And this is where you're recording your individual transactions, deposits, checks, journal entries, electronic withdrawals. We'll talk about electronic withdrawals. But anyways, it is something that we ask to see along with your quarterly reports. Especially if you're not balancing. That's the first thing I'm going to ask to see is your journal so I could figure out, maybe I could see something you're missing. So a journal entry, that is a non-cash transaction. That's used when you post your depreciation at year end, when you move transactions from prepaid or accounts receivable into their expense account. All right. Interesting. I'm sorry, I've got everybody's little heads are like blocking half of my screen here. So accounts receivable, that's when someone owes you money, i.e. Such as like if you give an advance to somebody for food for a feast expense, or you issue money to seed the gate for your cash boxes. And accounts payable is when you owe someone money. I would recommend you don't use that category if you can help it. Things like accounts receivable, accounts payables, liabilities, prepaid, I call those exchequer traps because if you have them at year end, they tend to not carry over because you don't know what to do with them. And then I end up with balancing issues when I'm trying to do my consolidated report. So if you have them on your report and you're not sure what to do with them, please reach out and we'll help you get those reconciled. A debit, this is always mind-blowing. So a debit is a positive. Expenses in the accounting world are always debits. That's not to be confused with a banking debit, which is a deduction like your debit card. So this is where it gets, you just think think the opposite of your debit card. You should be good. A credit is a negative in the accounting world. Income is always noted as a credit. Again, don't get it confused with the banking credit. To the banks, a credit to your account would be a positive. So, a trial balance, that is a form that shows you every balance for every account. The proof should always be 0. Some of the quarterly reporting formats that branches use actually have trial balances built into them. Some do not. They're kind of a great tool for figuring out where things might not be booked correctly. Balance sheet. Balance sheet is a picture of the overall health of the branch. We use a comparative balance sheet. And so it's a comparative of the assets and liabilities at the beginning and the end of a specific accounting period, usually quarterly. We can do a monthly if we wanted to, but it's a running total for the branch and it does not zero out at the end of the year. The income statement, that's a statement of income and revenue that you've made, revenue and expenses that you've incurred for the year. All right, bank reconciliations. So bank reconciliation is basically where you're going to reconcile your bank statement to your general ledger. In other words, your bank statement says you've got $20,000 on deposit at the end of March. But on March 15th, you wrote a check for $1,000 and it hasn't cleared out. So your true balance is actually $19,000. That's your reconciled bank balance. That's essentially what it is. And your quarterly report actually has a form built into it that reconciles your checking account for you. Pretty slick. Revenue is money that you have earned or were given in the form of a donation. This is always the gross amount. So income is the profit you have earned. This is usually the net amount. Revenue less expenses is your net income. An in-kind donation, that's when you're given an item of value that's not money. It's a couple of reams of fabric to make something for gold to keep. SCA does not track in-kind donations, thankfully. I couldn't imagine trying to wrap my brain around that one. All right, general funds. So that's money that's being collected for the general running of the group. All of you have a general fund. That's your primary bank account. Within that general fund, you can have a dedicated fund. That's monies that have been collected for a specific purpose, but they can be moved into the general fund usually after a specific time. So let's say you were raising money to buy war tabards, and which is perfectly acceptable. You actually dog ear that money in your general fund, and then you have a clause in there that says that once the tabards are all purchased and created and made, any excess funds roll back into the general fund. A restricted fund, that's an entirely different ballgame. Those are monies that have been collected and can only be used for a specific purpose and only that purpose. They can never be moved to the general fund, nor can the purpose be changed without going to the people who put the restrictions on the fund in the first place. I would recommend avoiding restricted funds if possible. As in the case of the Raven Travel Fund, we can never change the language in that fund now because one of the original authors of it has passed away. So we're stuck with that fund forever. Not that we would ever want to get rid of the Raven Travel Fund, but we might want to maybe change how it's structured. We can't make changes to its structure at all. Deferred revenue. This is also a bit of an exchequer trap sometimes. This is a liability because you haven't been given money for a specific, you have been given money for a specific purpose, like feast fees, gate entry, pre-reg. But and if the event doesn't happen, and you're going to have to give that money back. That's why it's called a liability. It doesn't become gross revenue until the event happens. So an example would be 12th night. If you're doing 12th night, chances are you're going to be collecting pre-registration money in November or December of the prior year. The event isn't occurring until the next year. So you take that money in and you just book it in the prior year as deferred income, deferred revenue. It's going to sit there more or less in suspense. In the next year, you take it out of deferred revenue and now you apply it to event income for the 12th night event that's happening in that year. So it's just, again, if you have deferred revenue, it doesn't happen often, but it's also something that we can all help you figure out how to book appropriately and then how to apply it in the coming year.
This hit a lot of people or a lot of groups in 2020 because they had things going before everything got shut down.
Yeah. Yeah. I know branches like Aquaterra, they've got Ursula, so every year they have deferred revenue that has to be booked appropriately and then applied to the event in the next year. So expenses are kind of self-explanatory. That's money you have spent. Bad debt is money you hope to collect but never have, such as somebody bounces a check to you. You're hoping to get that money from them. You might. Usually you do if it's somebody that's active in your branch. Fees and honoraria are money that you have paid to a company or individual that are for services rendered. So the fees would be anything like Department of Licensing fees, domain fees for websites. It could be honoraria. It could also be speaker fees for classes. That's where you would book these types of things. Depreciation. Oftentimes I tell new exchequers, don't even think about depreciation unless you need to add or take something off it. Right? But it's basically just an accounting equation. So this is where we take the current year cost of a large ticket item. It's an IRS term. It's a cumulative reduction in the cost of an item offsetting the original cost due to normal wear and tear. And so what the IRS wants us to do is to take that big item and kind of spread out that normal wear and tear to depreciation over the life of the item. It's also being known, the accounting term is to capitalize the asset. So the threshold for the cost of an item that would classify it as depreciable and necessary to go on your depreciation schedule instead of being considered a regular operating expense. It's changed over the years. So if you made a purchase after January of 2019, any purchases in excess of $2,000 are considered assets that go on the depreciation schedule. If it was a purchase between 1996 and 2018, the threshold was $500. And prior to 1996, the threshold was $100. You could still see things on your depreciation schedule that are valued at these lower levels. We do not take things off the schedule unless you no longer have the item. So even though it's already been depreciated and its depreciation value is 0, it still stays there as long as your branch still has it. And as far as your depreciation schedule goes on the quarterly report, the report has a built-in formula of some sort to where when you change it to fourth quarter, it automatically applies the depreciation into your income statement. So in most cases, you should not have to really think about your depreciation schedule much, provided it's set up correctly. Doomsday. You'll hear this phrase used every now and then. It's kind of a slang term that we used in reference to the year-end fourth quarter report for a branch. So that's what we refer to as our doomsdays. Every branch does a doomsday at year-end. You might also hear me reference a roll-up. And I've confused branches before when I mentioned my roll-up, and then I have to explain. So that's also kind of an SCA slang for the Kingdom's annual consolidated financial report to society. What I do with your year-end doomsdays is I take each one, I take every single number, every single keystroke, and I roll it into a consolidated report that then goes to society at year-end. Transfers in or out. This can be an area of confusion because basically we're not talking transfers from your savings account to your checking account in this instance. We're talking about funds being transferred from one SCA account to another SCA account. Most of us are all operating under the same tax ID number. Because of that, basically all of these all of your account, Kingdom's account, everybody's accounts are owned by SCA Inc. And so what we're talking about transfers is basically the SCA has lots of pockets and you're taking it from one pocket and you're putting the money in another pocket, but it's all the SCAs. So there's a specific way to account for transfers, whether you're going to whether you've got money from another SCA account that's coming into your account or money from your account going out. NMR payments, that's money from your account coming to Kingdom. That's a transfer. Profit sharing, those are transfers, those types of things. Petty cash, that's a small fund for incidental purchases, and it's just not allowed. I thought I'd bring that piece up. Don't do petty cash. If you have a branch that may have had a petty cash, I strongly suggest that you get rid of that right away. I came across one just recently. That's why I'm bringing it up. So audit trails. I'm bringing this up too because we're hitting the time of year where the SCA corporate is going to come back to me and want documentation to establish the audit trail on the financials, the roll-up that I submitted. And what that means is I'm going to get a request from society to provide backup documentation for a certain event's income, or for the occupancy and site fees booked by a branch. And so what we're looking for then will be copies of the deposit slips, check copies, receipts, bank statements, event reports, anything that backs up and can help trace the flow of cash through your account. I can guess, I mean, in the past, they tend to only focus on baronies when they request backup documentation. However, I think it might be a little different this year. I think they're going to definitely focus on any branches that actually had income, because so few did. So if you had income in 2020, definitely review your backup documentation, because I'm probably going to come asking for it within a couple months. IRS forms W-9 and 1099. These are required by the IRS, and you as exchequers, you must obtain a W-9 from, it gets really confusing, guys. Okay, so a W-9 is to provide the IRS with the information they need about a provider of goods or services, and it's used to determine that business owners or freelancers' annual taxes. It applies to sole proprietors, unincorporated businesses who provide goods and services in excess of $600. So, and Canadian businesses are exempt. One of the things to consider, as I mentioned, we are all under the same tax ID number. So if you have, so let's say Joe Arrow Maker makes arrows for everybody, to making arrows all across the kingdom, and your branch spends $200 on arrows, and another branch spends $200 on arrows. To you, it's only $200. It doesn't seem like it's going to exceed that level, but if he's selling to any other branches, that person very easily could do more than $600 worth of sales and trigger the need for a W-9. So we are advising you to obtain W-9s from anybody who provides goods or services in these types of instances. If you aren't clear if they qualify, please contact me. And then if you get a W-9, if you do get a W-9 from somebody, one of the things I'm asking is that you just send it directly to Mizelle. We're trying to reduce the amount of hands that actually touch or are responsible for the W-9. In some cases, especially like sole proprietors, they actually use their personal social security numbers. So we want to be sensitive to that and use proper security precautions when handling that type of information. And then the society is the one who will issue the 1099 at year end directly to that vendor. So I've actually received quite a bit of pushback, surprisingly so, from vendors in the SCA in regards to getting W-9s. If you do experience that, just let me know and we'll wade into it and figure it out. In some cases, it's not necessary, and we may not, we are mistaken in trying to get one, and we, we'll get that figured out. You'll hear us mentioning a 501c3. That is a designation of tax exempt educational charitable organization used by the United States Internal Revenue Service. So it doesn't really apply to our Canadian branches, other than we do expect them to not do anything that's going to jeopardize our tax exempt status. I'm not sure if they can up in Canada. And then I also put the tax ID number. This may come into play if you're changing bank accounts. And it's also readily available. If you need it, you can get it directly from me or from It's actually on the society website, also under Exchequer resources. And that was it.
Should that email address be taxes@sca.org, not antir.org?
It's, oh, that's totally wrong. You're right. Thank you, Thorkel. You know what's funny is I thought I cut and pasted that out of an email. Maybe not. So you're right, guys. That is taxes@sca.org. It'll bounce
Ellen,
back. There is no taxes at antir.org.
Can I add something as well?
Yes.
So for the Canadian ones, which there's only one other person besides me on, the SCA is registered as an extra-provincial society in the province of British Columbia and in many provinces across Canada. And we are just as obligated not to violate any of the society regulations. So it's equivalent to not impacting the US tax.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm so glad you're here. Because honestly, I don't understand a lot of that Canadian piece, and this is where I really rely on. I've relied on Dame Elena quite a bit over the past few years. So, thank you.
And if Kingdom doesn't have a copy of that extra provincial registration, I do, and I can forward it to you for your records.
You know what? Why don't you? I may have it, and I just don't know what I'm looking at here. So, but just to be safe, why don't you send one to me, and I'll make sure I've got it in our records, clearly labeled as to what it is.
Will do.
Thanks. Okay, well, that was it for me. Who's next?
Me.
All right.
Dun, dun, dun. I get the dry stuff, so I tried to make it a little bit less dry than it should be. I don't know. Let's.
Does this pair well with a nice Chardonnay? Is that what you're saying?
It does. It does. So forms. So most people, when the idea of being an exchequer is brought up, they go, "Oh my God, the forms," and they go mad. They're not that hard. They're not. There's a lot of them, yes, but they make sense in the long run. Seriously, don't fear them. All right. So we're the record keepers. It doesn't count if it's not written down. If someone says they're going to give you money, they haven't given you money until they give you money and you write it down. Something that has been beaten into my soul is people get funny about money. And I think Etienne will go over that a little bit later in hers, but basically it's got to be written down. If it's written down, everything is out in the open and there's no hard feelings or weirdness going on. This is the business side of the SCA, so you have to keep records. Come on, next slide. Thank you. So, check requests. This is the how do you give somebody money? This is a check request, and I'll break down the form here in a little bit, but there should be one of these attached to every check you write. Mostly. There are some that you can skip doing a check request forms, usually like I'm thinking the NMR checks, because they're transfers to other branches and probably transfers to other branches in general can skip a check request because they get tracked differently. But anything you're giving money to someone to buy something for an event, for regalia, for paying a bill, should be on one of these. I put the staple receipt and photocopy if needed on this because the carbon receipts that you get from stores will fade over time, especially in heat. I live in Eastern Washington. It gets hot here. So if you photocopy it and then staple the original and the photocopy to this, you should be good to go. Top part of the check request. This is the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. This is, fill in the blanks. You need to at least get paid to the order of, charged to the office of, and a description into this check request. Otherwise, yes, NMR payments from Canada are not transfers, they're donations. Correct. Canada being Canada. But also whether it is a reimbursement, cash advance, or direct payment. Direct payments are things like when you pay the DMV for license trailer tabs, when you pay an invoice kind of thing. Cash advances, I'm going to give you $500. You're going to do a feast and give me the receipts and the change back. Reimbursement is you bought this thing that was approved. Here's the money to repay. The more information you get here, the easier the paper trail is going to be in the long run. So feel free to add more to this information. How much money is moving in and why? So there's 3 columns on this form: office admin, events, and fundraising. And those will break down to the IRS documentation for a 501c3. So if you look at, you can look at how much money is being moved in office and office expenses or that kind of things. Events are the things that are towards the 501c3 goal, and fundraising is making money outside of the goals. Not a lot of that. I have not used the fundraising column section a lot. And then there's a philosophical question for some things, whether they should be office admin or events. The description that usually comes up is a storage unit. What is being held at the storage unit? If it's storage of paperwork and old records, that's probably more office admin. If it's event type items, tents, gates, gate tables, well, really that's more used for events. But there's a very much gray area between those two, and that might take a deeper philosophical discussion. Reconciliation. When you write the check, you need to write down what the check number was and when it was paid. Because the data entry on the journal, the check date should be the date you wrote the check, but you may not have paid it. They may request it on the 1st of the month, and then you write the check on your business meeting on the 10th of the month, and then they don't cash it until the 20th of the month. So you need to make sure that that is correct in all of those informations. So that first part on the top, you're going to put the 1st. When you write the check is going to be the 10th. That's when you wrote it. And so when the journal entry comes in, when the entry you make in the journal, not the journal entry, it's going to be on the 10th. And then there's a reconcile for the cash advances. If you wrote a check for $500 and they give you receipts for $490, well, they also need to give you $10 back because it's got to be $500. If they have receipts for $510, you could owe them $10, or they could donate that to you. That's kind of up to you and the way your financial committee and group works. So this is a deposit form, and it is just a Word document that is collection out there. And all of these documents are in the training folder, and I will make sure to share that when I get done with this so I can actually post it in the chat. And this is just helps you keep track of when you go to the bank, where the money actually came from. Because if you're doing a deposit of an event from an event, you're going to have possibly a gate return, a deposit from the event, and maybe some donations in there. So if you have this, you can break down where it's coming from. And conveniently, the number across the top, across the left-hand side, is also what journal entry code it's going to be in. And then we'll get to that in a minute. The photocopy of the deposit slips, it's the same thing. The receipts you get from the bank don't always last. The carbon paper gets whatever. So if you photocopy the deposit slip and the receipt from the bank, you have a good copy of it. I say photocopy. At this point, we can scan and keep it digital, and that gets whole other questions on the digital versus physical. So the gate sheet. This is the gate sheet that was created by Mistress Isabella of Wastekeep And then we've modified it a couple times. I think this is an older one because it doesn't have the credit card totals. But this is your record. This is your financial record of the event. This is how you prove how many people were at the event and how much money you made from those people. Because otherwise you're laundering money, and that's not good. So SCA name, modern name, just so you can keep track of it, what branch they are, adult, youth, and child, although in An Tir, I don't think anyone breaks them down any further than adult and not adult. SCA membership and expiration, blue card, white card, NMS. Yeah, this is an old fleet, sorry. This is an old copy of it because we've changed this now. But there are variations of this. You can do this one, you can make the changes, you can add or subtract, but this is just, everything. Post-event reporting. This will be how you can share with your branch the event that you just ran or that was just run, how they did. So you can break down how many people at what fee structure for everything. And all of this is an Excel sheet that is in the group, and you can change and tweak the labels and the totals however you would like to. But this should give you the basic reporting of how much. Now, on the Kingdom website, there is a Kingdom form that has like 4 or 5 pages that includes the entire event breakdown. And there is a smaller section that has some of this basic information. But I know, like, I live in a canton of 12 people. We don't need this five-page form for this. We just need this 1 page. All together. So Etienne will go over this a little bit more. This is the check register from our corner beer from 2019. And you'll see we've got what the date was, what the check number was, because at that point, and we are still living mostly in a checking world, and I'm sorry, Canada, I understand. Who gets it, what's it for, some more details, and then the report line. We're not going to go too deep into the report line, but a lot of the information, if you can get it into the report line, can I highlight? No, I can't highlight. The line number, 192 IB5 IH. A lot of that will fill in further down the report. So you only have to enter it once and you don't end up getting a duplicate or an error in data entry. And you can see line 2 and line 3, the interest earned, how we have a deposit and a journal entry because it's two double entry accounting, and it's a journal entry that they're talking about. This is the part of the form on the bank reconciliation, which they'll go over here in a little bit. But you can see this is February of 2021, what our bank total is from the bank based on the account reconciliation form they give you, and how much you think we have, and if you have any outstanding deposits or checks. Easy, does the math because it's Excel. Questions?
Are we going to get Excel training?
We can do some Excel training. When I would say probably when you get matched up with somebody, they can help with that a lot. The form is a rather complicated looking form, but a lot of it is just data entry, I'll be honest. And that also depends on what version of what form you're using. The form you can download from SCA Corporate does not have the included journal section. So they expect you to have your own journal, but then you end up with 2 forms and then you have to match. It's a pain in the, yeah. But we have a form that has been broken down that I think has the updated information that SCA Corporate wants. That also has a quarterly journal report, which is what I had pictures of there. So you can see all of your, your Q1, your Q2, in different tabs in the Excel. And we can show that later if we want to. Easy, easy, super easy. And there are people here to help if you need help. I'm looking at you, Isa. Event accounting. Orontius, you want to take over?
Yeah. Can I share the screen or?
You should be able to.
All right. Where do I go to share the screen? Oh, there. Hold on. I'll get there.
The button that says
Yep.
share screen.
Got it. Is it showing up for everybody?
Yes.
All right. All right. And Dame Elena, if there's something specific about Canada you should mention, jump in there, because this is tailored for US branches primarily. And Kira, our NMR deputy, may jump in a time or two, and she actually has her own section to talk about gate processes and NMR. So, and I'm going to go through this kind of rapidly. This pulls information from the Society Handbook, the Kingdom Events Handbook, and a couple other sources. And it's not all inclusive. So if there's something where you have a question, or there might, or if it looks like there's some missing information, jump in there, ask questions. Let's see here. Events. The two main purposes for an event in SCA is to fulfill our 501c3 educational mandate, where we teach each other and the modern public what the Middle Ages were all about. And most 99% of the branches in the SCA use events as a way to generate income for their branch. So it runs the branch for the year and funds all the things we need to be an SCA branch. All right. As the Exchequer, and before I go into this, it occurred to me earlier that this is tailored for in-person events. That's mainly my background. But more and more, we're seeing expenses for virtual events, Zoom accounts, online conferencing, maybe some advertising. And there are actually branches out there in the known world who are charging admittance for virtual events. So you may see some of that. But I don't talk to that in this slideshow. So just something to keep in mind. As the Exchequer for branch, you are the primary holder of all information for an event, mainly because it's money, it's income, and you're spending money to support the event. So you maintain all the historical files for it. Being that you have the past history on the event, when it occurs, the size of it, usually the number of people in attendance, all the general expenses. And when you keep a file on each event, it's from conception to planning to execution and all the whole closing process. So think long-term, it's from birth to death of the event. When you get a bid, the first thing you're gonna do is look through it for accuracy and its completeness, adequacy. Does it look right? Does it pass the common sense test? And compare it to past similar events. Do you think it does cover everything? Be investigative, ask questions. That's your job as an Exchequer. As the Exchequer, you're gonna advise any team that puts together a bid and the autocrat event steward on who can handle money and how they will handle it, and any other financial issues you think are important in regard to that event. In fact, on larger and more complex events, the Exchequer needs to be considered as part of the team, a working member of the team. So that's something else you should keep in mind. All right. All right, and I break my concept down in 2 different types of events. Every branch has events they hold year after year, and those are a little bit easier to establish because you have past history. They're generally the same site is used or the same type of site. So it's a little bit easier to set up because you have a lot of the starting info. But several times during the year, a brand new event may be promoted or requested or proposed. And that's a little bit trickier because you've never done it before. You'll have to develop the vision, the concept, and all the parts that will go into the event. And that's cost, that's money. And then is it going to be worth it to do that event with the income you generate? All right, most of the Kingdom, here's the event bid form. And the Kingdom has a general event bid form on the Kingdom website. And I have seen a lot of branches, and my own Dragon's Lair included, who have taken this event bid form and have tailored it to events that they specialize in locally, or special items that the local area, county, city, municipality really requires, or other items. So the person who does the forms for the Kingdom, and she lives in Seagirt, and my brain is blanking on that at the moment. She is easy to work with.
Morgaine?
What's that?
Is that Morgaine?
No, former Kingdom Seneschal.
Viscountess Lenora.
Lenora, that's it.
Lenora.
Yes. I've worked with Lenora a couple of times, and she loves doing forms and will chop on any additions or changes on this. And she actually helped us in Dragon's Lair change this form to make it Dragon's Lair specific. So she's a great resource for that. All right, a consideration up front after you've established your event is pre-registration, and does the size and type of event warrant it? Larger events, it makes it easier to run a gate because of that. Feast, you need a pre-registration to determine amount of food. Some larger events, you want pre-registration for camp mapping. When you designate a pre-registration coordinator, and you should, even if it's just the event steward, or the event steward may even ask you to do it. If do you have the space to do that? Should you? That's something to consider. But pre-registration coordinator, will they be handling money? If so, they need to at least be a member. They don't necessarily have to be warranted, but they have to be a member and be in good standing to be able to handle money. Let's see, pre-registration forms. I don't have any here. I wish I had included a pre-registration form, but Google Docs and has a lot of pre-generated pre-registration forms we've used in the STA, and I'll maybe I'll post a link later. But that's generally the easiest way to do it, and because you can put a link to that Google Doc from your event, so people can just go there directly and fill out the data. Will a pre-registration reduced price be offered? That happens a lot. People, to entice people to pre-register, get their stuff in early. But you be careful on that because you don't want to affect your bottom line. That's a consideration. And then last here, PayPal. Are you going to use PayPal for pre-registration? It's an awesome tool. And best used for larger events, though, because there's a little bit of complexity to it. One reminder, though, that PayPal does cost, so make sure to budget for those fees, or at least account for those fees somehow. And Catherine may talk about that later in more detail, but I just wanted to mention it here. All right, when you get a bid, things to look for in the submitted bid. And keep in mind, as the Exchequer, sometimes the Seneschal gets the event bid, but you need to be part of that process. And that should be outlined in your branch customary. Being that you run the financial committee meeting, it's generally your responsibility to maintain all the events. So make sure you're working well with your seneschal and to be part of all event planning processes there. All right, at least 1 week for review. Make sure that any potential autocrats, and announce this on a fairly regular basis, that you need to see an event bid with a few days at least before it's considered a financial committee meeting, so you can look through it. Make sure everything's covered that we talked about earlier is adequate. When you look at the bid, are all the typical charges that you would normally see at an event covered? Site costs, biffies, trash, permits, all the things you might think of. And compare that with past similar events. Are the costs similar? If they're not, why? Take a look into that. And ask if the insurance will be required, golf cart, the general liability. Does the site require named insurance? Is there equestrian events going to be anticipated? Then take a look at your site fee. And this is a balancing act as well. You want to cover your expenses and you'd like to make a profit, but at the same time, you got to keep in mind the population, the SCA. You don't want to burden them too heavily with something they can't afford. So you think through that carefully. And then last, this is always a headache, gate comps. Event stewards think they can let all their friends in sometimes for free if they're helping out the event. And you gotta dig into that if you see potential for that happening. Gate comps can be allowed. They gotta be approved by the financial committee in some way. Sometimes things are covered in the branch financial policy. Sometimes cooks can be, and some kitchen staff can be comped, but it's the reason why and what they're being covered for must be spelled out as part of the bid or the financial policy. And keep in mind that those comps can affect the bottom line, so you got to be careful with that. All right, feast. Again, like I was talking about with the pre-registration coordinator, your feast coordinator should be somebody who you can trust to handle budgeting and funds, both income and outflow, because they're going to be spending money in support of the feast, and they may be dealing with people who will be paying for the feast, and they're going to be considering the cost of the feast too. If it's a brand new person, maybe they should have a mentor. And I should have mentioned that with the event steward itself. If they don't have a financial background, or if they have a past of financial irregularities, you take that in consideration. You have a say in who handles money. As the branch exchequer, you are the end all and be all of all financial transactions. Well, working with the financial committee, of course, but it's important that you stand up and say something if something's going to affect financial consideration, and that includes people. All right, the proposed feast style. There's a wide variety of feasts in the SCA, and they all cost different amounts. A potluck at one end, where the barony might spend a very minimal amount of money, or they may just buy a main course, to a fully served feast that might cost $1,500, $2,000. Wide range, something to take into consideration. And then the next step is, will the feastocrat buy everything and ask for reimbursement? Probably not. More often than not, they'll ask for an advance. So when do they need it? How much do they need up front? You don't necessarily want to give a feast steward $2,000 up front if they don't need that. Make sure that it's an expected and reasonable expense. You're always on the lookout for things like that. All right, and then like we were talking about earlier, proposed feast fee, isn't it reasonable? Does it cover the cost? On the feast, less so than the event, you're not looking to create profit so much. You're mainly just covering the feast itself, but you know, it's a consideration. All right, the gate head. This is another area where you want to be, you want to take a look at who's going to be the gate head. They are they experienced? They know how, especially for a large event, say a June Fair and Ursulmus, the gate head needs to be somebody who has some experience in running a large, complex gate. If it's a relatively newer person, they might need a mentor. Talk to them, ask questions. You may decide that it needs to be somebody else. And all people who handle money must be members. That's a rule that's going to be repeated often. All right. The event, at the time of the event bid, it would be good for you to sit with the potential event steward and talk about a preliminary plan for the gate process. And Kira will talk about that more later. Oftentimes, the branch financial policy will have at least a broad outline of how their local branch gates will be run. If not, or if the event itself has some special considerations, you'll want to see a written outline of how that gate's going to be run. I know that seems like a pain, but having it written so it's in black and white and both you and the gatehead understand completely how it's going to run can be very helpful. And that plan should include how money is handled every point of the way, when it's handed to the person at the gate, when the person behind the till is accounting for it, when it's put into the envelope and accounted there, and then given to the Exchequer for deposit. Make sure security measures are in place at all times. And then something that has sometimes been a problem, deposits made in a timely manner. There is a time limit always in the financial policy. Deposits must be made within a certain amount of time from the end of the event. Adhere to that. Money's been lost before due to things like that. All right, once all this is done, the event bid discussion happens at the branch financial committee meeting. So it's recorded in the financial committee minutes. As the Exchequer, you're running the financial committee. So just as a reminder, and so you're running the processing of this bid. The Seneschal is the legal end of this, so they have a big say in this, but you're the one processing the bid. The event steward will present their bid at the financial committee meeting. If any questions come up, they'll answer it. And it's important that the event bid is brought up at a committee meeting or a branch meeting so that the population can listen in too, because they're your backbone of support anyway, and their consideration from financial. They should have a buy-in on anything where money is spent. The bid includes a preliminary list of event team members. And this is important to the Exchequer too, to ensure that you don't see anything that could present a problem financially. Time for questions is allowed, and after all the questions have been asked and answered and all the considerations made, the financial committee will make their decision at that time, and it's recorded in the financial committee minutes. Unless there are, of course, questions that come up, and it will be tabled until a future decision. All right, files. I was talking about this earlier. It's important that you maintain a good set of files for the events, and you want to keep it for historical purposes. Keep a folder or a separate file for the event from, like I was talking earlier, from inception to completion. Keep all your information there so it's easy to find, because you'll want to, especially on larger events, you'll want to find receipts, you'll want to do reconciliations, you'll want to do the final event report. You want all your information in one place. as well as over the life of the bid and the planning itself, changes could happen. You might change sites, you might add items, so the budget's going to be affected. And any budgetary changes need to be brought up a financial committee and basically approved. Let's see here. And along those lines, all expenditures for the event must be covered by the budget and are formally approved. The event steward needs to be involved in all those, of course. If somebody comes to you with a check request for an event and says, pay this, make sure the event steward has okayed that as part of the budget. And minimally, at least in Dragonstar, we have the event steward sign off on the check request form. All right, refund policy. Typically, in branch financial policies, a refund policy is located there. But some events may have a different timeline because of the site or the type of event it is. So make sure it's spelled out in one place or another, written down, and advertise it. It must have dates, why a refund could be asked for, and how that refund is going to be given. Refunds are always given by paper check. Well, that may change in the future, but right now, all refunds are given by a paper check. Let's see here. There are some occasions, some reasons why refunds are not possible, and that should be clearly stated as well, even if it's obvious. Once food has been purchased for a feast, it's done. A refund should not be expected. And there are extenuating circumstances that the branch may allow for, death in the family. A branch may decide to go ahead and refund that person. But once purchases are made, refunds are not something you generally want to do. All right, next section we're going to talk about gate, and then this is Kira's specialty here. Hey, Kira.
Hi, I'm Kira, Michael's daughter. I'm actually the NMR deputy and the soon incoming, as of 2 days from now, the baronial exchequer for Blythe for a second time. Gate is actually pretty simple, and I think people sometimes take a chance and they kind of overthink it. So I kind of wrote up a general things that are really needed for gate. You want your blank gate sheets. As you can see, I have the same example that Trent had for his gate sheet. I did not pull example of the waivers, but they're typically your non-member surcharge waiver, your minor waivers, and your horse waiver if you have equestrian on site. There is an NMR waiver that has the horse waiver in it available now. So it's just all one waiver to be signed, and everybody just signs it when they come into gate. If you're going to have PayPal, you're going to need a tablet with Wi-Fi access, and our I don't, my brain's not working now, but to be able to use PayPal and get services where you can use that tablet. Clipboards and pens, a cash box that locks. I use signage at my gates, especially my in hotel gates. One that says pre-reg, one that says cash and check, credit. And then I learned recently that it might be better to have, especially for Kingdom events, a separate line for those who are comped coming into the events, because that way you don't accidentally write down that they're being charged. I run an envelope system with my gate, so I always have a labeled envelopes. And the example that I have there at the bottom under the gate sheet are, you can print them out on stickers to put in your envelopes. Those are available on the SharePoint that Trent has put together. Go ahead, Orontius, next one. Don't overthink it. First off, you cannot be gate lead as the exchequer. The event needs to set up a gate lead. They need to be somebody that you can work with and somebody you approve of. Because we'll go back to Auntie Annette saying people get funny about money. You need to be an adult Blue Card member to take money. You should always run 2 people deep, both Blue Card members if you can. You as the Exchequer can sit and work gate. I would suggest you not be the one to accept the money in your own barony, but you can do it in other baronies. I do it a lot. Organization is the key. Working with a gate lead before an event, letting them know what your expectations are and why, making sure your gate sheets get filled out completely when each person pays. This way you aren't going back and trying to remember who paid what. And then also making sure all your waivers are signed as they come through the gate. That way you're not hunting people down later. Go ahead. Closing gate or the cash box. The gate lead can cash out the volunteers on each envelope or shift. You always want to make sure 2 people are counting what's in that envelope or counting at the end of that shift and signing off what was counted and verifying against each gate sheet. The Exchequer for big events can do cash drops every couple of hours. For Autumn War, I do them about every 4 hours on the busy days. On our slower days, Wednesday and Thursday morning, I'll do them like midday and then end of day. We count all the envelopes, we verify all the gate sheets in the envelopes, and then when cash is changing hands. So as you're setting up with your gate start, each envelope for me or each gate box has got a start in it, and they're going to count that. You're going to count that with that person taking control of that cash at that point in time. You're going to count each envelope and cash box twice, and each person who counts it needs to sign the reconciliation form with initials or even signature. And then at the end of the event, the Exchequer can take control of the funds. They must sign with the event steward and the gate lead for the final count. And then this is an example of a gate reconciliation cash sheet. I will also take this where it says gate sheet data, and you have your gate sheet count across the front, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I will take that and put it into an Excel spreadsheet and recount them after the event to make sure that they are all in order and we counted them correctly at the time of the event. I will invite the event steward to meet up with me or the gate lead to recount everything before a deposit happens. Go ahead. So you're gonna,
yeah,
you can go ahead. Well, I touched on NMR on this one. So I was gonna jump in and do the MNR really quick.
Right. Yeah, and that's the next slide.
So after you count all your gate sheets for the event, you have your NMR. Before an event, as the NMR deputy, usually at the beginning of the month, you or at the end of the month before your event, you will receive in your An Tir email and your Exchequer email a NMR sheet with my name and address on it. The event will be filled out, the date for the event will be filled out, and the due date by when your stuff is due. I want to point out, if you can't get it mailed off and to me within 10 days after an event, which is what it needs to be in by, please email me, because I have a report I have to create for the Kingdom Exchequer at this for Elowen. Hopefully she'll still be Exchequer when we get to do events again. That we have to create that report and report it at the end of every month. So if your event's like on March 28th, I've got to be able to get that into her by April 10th. So I'm not going to have your accounting at that point in time. But if you've emailed it to me and let me know that it's going to be on the way, I will be able to put it in my report and hold you to the fact that that check's going to be received. Especially with the Canadian branches, it takes a little bit longer for the mail to get to me. Go ahead.
That was it, Kira.
Yeah, that's it.
All right. After the end of the event's actually not over until all the bills have been paid and the final event report is done. As I was talking to earlier, make sure all your deposits have been made. Every now and then, somebody will have accidentally set aside a deposit and you find it in a cash box or something. So those things do happen, but you always want to keep the timeline for deposit requirements in mind. And then bounce that against your gate sheets. Is everything you expected shown up? So that's always consideration. Have all the expected receipts been paid? Go through what you've paid out. Is there anything missing? Have you paid the final trash fee? Have you been given the deposit back from your site? All those are considerations and things you want to look for. Review the gate sheets from the event. You're, like Kara was saying, you're gonna reconcile the middle of the NMR, but you also want to look at the gate sheets and make sure things ran smoothly and the correct monies were collected and what you have is what you're expecting. And then in a lot of branches, it's oftentimes the responsibility of the Exchequer to submit the gate sheets to the Kingdom Archives. Thankfully, Dragon's Lair it's the Seneschal's job, but in the past, I've had to do that. So something to keep in mind.
Rontios?
Yes.
I'd like to point out one thing. Make sure you keep copies and give the originals to the Seneschals.
That's correct.
Because those copies, especially if it's a big event, may get asked for in this day and age of the auditors coming back. So make sure you have copies.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. As well as, and Tina just reminded me, if problems come up, somebody paid 2 or 3 times at a gate, or twice, husband paid for a wife and then wife paid for the husband. You want to go back and reconcile that through the gate sheets too. And other things such as that. When you fill out your final event report, Trent showed that earlier. Make sure this is a good place to make sure you have all your information accounted for. You'll want to be able to present that report to the barony, or at least give it to the event steward for them to present to the barony. And you want to take that information. What's nice to have is a spreadsheet of the event over time, or a spreadsheet of all your events for the branch over time. It sounds like a pain to set up, but once you have it set up, it's a really nice way to look at what your branch goes through during a typical year, or even an abnormal year, in expenses. And that will help you with budgeting if budgets or events are part of your budget, which they should be. And as far as the expected income for your branch too, and expenses. And that was it. I kind of rambled a bit. Apologies on that. Anybody have any questions that I didn't cover?
How do we deal with people asking to pay for someone else? We tend to not allow it because it's too hard to track. That was from Maris Siege and Thordwald.
Yeah, I have seen it done a number of ways, and I talked to that a little bit earlier. But sometimes a husband will pay for a wife, and a wife pay for a husband, and you have to go back and reconcile. I don't have a good rule on that. To somebody else, I mean, sometimes people have come back and said, hey, we've paid this. And what we're stuck with at that moment is having to pay a check later as far as in regards to reimbursement.
So what I do is I like to keep paper at gate. When I'm running gate, I like to keep some sort of paper that I can write it down separate. Hey, my husband's due in tomorrow, and I'll put, so-and-so at such and such, and I'll put it in the gate box, or in the gate box where other shifts can see it. He's signed in on gate sheet 3, but I only do it if it's a blue card member, and they have that blue card to show me, because if a waiver needs to be signed at any point, I won't do it.
Right.
Because that way I know that waiver gets signed. And so if there are equestrian on site, I won't do it because they have to come through gate.
Right.
Sorry.
I was gonna say, I totally agree because I have signed my husband in many times, but I always have his blue card with me. And it's on the same gate sheet, so we're not having to do the looking for, because you're absolutely right, Kira. If you sign someone in and then they're gonna actually sign in later, then you have to find that gate sheet. If they paid for two, it's way too confusing. It's gotta be, you've got both blue cards. That's what they paid. It's all on one sheet. And if the person comes later, they can say, signed in on gate sheet 3, line 4, or whatever.
Good
And you
point.
can see it.
And Elena, my rule is different. My rule is no.
Right.
I explain it to them, look, the person who'll be on gate may be different. We won't be here, waivers. And I've never really had anyone get too angry. And in these days of cell phones, it's like, just give them a text and have them meet you at gate if you're the one that has the money. Because that's quite often the reason behind it is they won't have any cash. Well, you can meet them at gate. Because it's just too easy to either overpay or underpay, and the waivers are critical. I would add to Mistress Mersha's comment, how do you deal with people who run in and say, oh, I can I just set up and come back? And I think that's another thing gate gets a lot, unless they are reigning royalty, in which case I say, please go ahead, Your Highnesses, because I know that they have valid cards, because that's the seneschal's job, the principality or kingdom seneschals, to make sure if it's the crown. But you ask them, have a member of your retinue come back to sign you in. Other than that, for people who say, well, I just need to put it down, what I might say to those people, because they're sort of saying they'll come back within like a very short time, is just quickly sign in on the gate form so I know you're inside. And then if they don't come back within a half an hour, I can go get them. But that's the only circumstance in which I would let them go in without paying right away.
Good point. Any other questions? All right. What's next?
Well, I think this might be a good time to maybe take a break, stretch our legs, get something to drink.
Must be a babe.
Yeah.
All right. I think I'm up next, right, with how to reconcile a bank account, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let's do this. And I can share, and everybody can see that? Okay, so let me start the... All right, so you've gotten now, we've done all of the, you've had your events, you've paid expenses, you've made some deposits. So now you need to do your monthly reconciliation of your transactions. So basically, you need to reconcile your bank statement, and you need to do that every month. Even if you know you didn't have any transactions, you should still log in, and hopefully you can have digital access. You need to look at your bank account to make sure it looks okay. You need to download your bank statement, or look at your mail one. If you can, start amassing a digital library of your bank statements, because it will make it much easier at the end of the year, end of quarter, and all of that, when you have to send them to Ellen for your year-end stuff. It also gives you a chance to basically start a digital library of your financial records, because I go back into last year's or the year before, because I want to see how long it took somebody to, cash a check, or what was sometimes I'll look at it for, okay, what were our bank charges? When was, something going through? I use them. I use them in my professionally I'm a bookkeeper, so I always have them. I also download and I started a digital access, a digital copy of all checks that were written. And the reason why I started doing that was we house fire, lost all of the transactions. Well, I could at least pull down copies of the checks. You may not have the backup, but at least you could look at it and say, oh, I remember this, and maybe recreate stuff if you had to. So I always have that available to me. And I've had to do this for a client who ended up with a fire in her office, and I was able to have copies of all her checks. So that's what I started doing. It just
Can you use a Quicken document?
no. Quicken, don't use Quicken. Quicken will not give you what you need. Quicken is it's a what I'm going to show you what form to use to be able to reconcile, but Quicken is not a good bookkeeping tool. It's fine for personal stuff, but it does not give you the information you need to be able to do your quarterly reports. You don't need Quicken. You can do everything. You can do everything in an Excel spreadsheet. So the tools you need when you're going to be reconciling your bank statement, and again, that's my personal feeling. We are using QuickBooks, which is much heavier on the kingdom level. And I think, Trent, you use QuickBooks Online too, correct? For Laurel?
Because they make me, yes.
Yes, because they make you, I know. Because it's overkill. Really, it's overkill. You're gonna for what we do, unless it's Kingdom, they have a lot more going on. It's overkill. You can do everything in an Excel spreadsheet. So the tools you need your bank statement, paper or digital. You need your check requests, your deposit records, and your check register or general ledger, depending on what you call it. So on your bank statement, the information you need to look for, and I'm not sure if you can see, hopefully you can see it. You need your beginning balance, which is located here. These are the numbers you need to take note of. Your total additions, basically that's your deposits. That can also be electronic deposits. Sometimes you'll get refunds of bank fees, and that will also be a deposit. Some banks will also have line. This is pretty simple. This is the Barronese one back from 2013, so it was the easiest one to grab and at least give everything I needed on one sheet of paper as opposed to two. So you need your total additions, which is basically your deposits. You need your total subtractions, which is basically your checks or any electronic withdrawals. And while we're really not supposed to have electronic withdrawals, we do, because if you order checks or if you have bank fees, those are electronic withdrawals. And sometimes bank statements will have a line item for checks, a line item for electronic withdrawals, and then they'll have a total line for all your subtractions. It just depends on who you bank with. I've seen it done dozens of different ways. The next thing you will need to have is you will need to have your ending balance, and that will be located here because that will be put on a form, and I'll show that to you here in a moment. You need what checks have cleared this month. Now, keep in mind that this does not show the checks that maybe haven't cleared at all, which is why you need your check register. It will also show any deposits that have cleared and why you need your check register in case you have deposits that have not cleared. Hopefully that isn't the case. The only time you're going to have that is if you have an event that spreads, goes over the week end of the last, your last at the end of the month. Hopefully you won't have that. Personally, I would just put the deposits in for the new month and save your hassle of having to remember to take them out. Besides, banks aren't open, so you shouldn't be depositing anyway. So you wouldn't necessarily record them at the end of the month. All right. On your check registered, you need to compare and mark off the checks that have cleared. And as you see here, here's the checks that cleared from that last bank statement. Now this one here, there's a bunch of them, but it is only one check number because it went different ways. You can see, and we'll talk about this more in subsequent trainings. This is basically an overview. And this is how this particular check register was set up. Allison Erickson gave us receipts for printing, food supplies. Really the check is a certain amount, and that's off in a column that you guys can't see for this one. I needed to shrink it down. You need to make note of what checks and deposits have not cleared. So you can see here check number 2089 has not cleared because there's no X. And I know people who use the month that this cleared. They'll put J here for June or JN. It's whatever you're comfortable using. You'll see here also check number 2092 has not cleared. And then, of course, all the checks down here on 620, none of them have cleared because they were written probably at the end of the month. And then you need to add your interest to your register. Since this particular interest is going into the main account, there is no journal entry needed at this point. And that, like I said, we'll talk about that in subsequent trainings. You also need to make note of your ending register balance, this right here, because you will need that on the form. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. So the bank reconciliation report. This is part of a bigger report form, and I'm going to show. Basically, this is part of the bigger form. And this has got the contact information and secondary, all of this. This is actually something that you should be keeping. And I use this every single month. The reason being is you will basically make a PDF of this reconciliation, and I update my report every single month. If you don't have a lot of transactions, you don't necessarily need to do that, but it just makes it much easier than sitting down, the first week in April going, okay, I don't remember what this was for 3 months ago. You've already filled it in. And I balance it every month so that you can figure out where your problems are on an easier basis. If you reconcile March and March, and then you're off in April, it has something to do with the April transactions. Just something to keep in mind. So this is in your quarterly quarterly report. Use this every single month. Fill out the top part at the beginning of the year, this right here. I don't know if you can see it. The Barony of Wonderful SCA Inc. name of the branch. That's your bank account title. Your account type is usually going to be checking. This should say dual signature, always dual signature. Your account number. Now, some people are kind of squeamish about putting the account numbers there. I'll leave that up to you, how you feel. Your Kingdom Exchequer must have this information. So if you don't actually put it here because you don't want it out in the world and you just put the last 4 digits, that's fine. But make sure your Kingdom Exchequer has those bank account numbers. And then your statement ending date. This up here, this branch, name of the branch, this is all filled in on another form. And I didn't change the quarter. It will automatically fill in the date for the quarter. And I just didn't change it for this because this is our training one. So one thing you need to make sure to remember, always change this statement ending date to the current month. If you don't put that in there, it will not make the report work, just so you know. All right. So the next thing you need from your bank statement, and if you're lucky enough to have digital and have 2 monitors, it's pretty easy to go back and forth. If not, you're working from paper. You fill in this line 1, you're filling in the balance from the bank statement. And if you go back, you'll see that it's right here, this 23,160, 23,196.58. Basically, you will have you'll enter in any of the deposits that you're sitting basically around your house, which I hope that just shouldn't be. Let's just put it that way. You should have everything in the, I have never seen this filled in. So at least not if you're doing it right. You're putting in the check number, the date, and the amount. And here are all those 620 checks that didn't clear. Remember, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, and all of their amounts. It'll give you a total. It'll give you a total, and these are all filled in by formulas. You don't have to fill it, do the math itself. It will do it for you. It'll tell you what they think your register balance is supposed to be. You enter what the register balance is supposed to be from your register. And if you've done things correctly and you balance right away, they will match. And I'll go into what to do if they don't and how to find some of the errors. I then save this as a PDF, and I usually name it, 2020 June bank rec. And I will save it a digital copy, and then I will print a copy of it, because you are supposed to have your seneschal sign this. And that piece looks like down here. Can you see this, everybody?
Time.
So your seneschal should sign this, you sign it, date it.
12:55-ish.
And then also on this primary reconciliation account, you should also have who are your signers on your account, their addresses, and basically their membership number and their expiration dates. A lot of times, this may not everybody be on your financial committee. You may have a check signer that isn't directly on your financial committee, just for continuity's sake. It's kind of nice to have, besides banks like that. They like continuity.
If can I interject just a little bit?
Please do,
As
dear.
far as this page goes and the signers on your bank account, I'm going to be focusing on those quite a bit on this next quarter's financial statements that come in, because society is really leaning on me to double check with every branch and ensure that there's a kingdom rep on your bank account.
Yep.
I'm finding a disturbing number of branches don't have them. So I'm not out to beat anybody up, but we do need to get that corrected this year if that is the case. So please do not send me your quarterly report without your signers listed there. I will come right back to you and ask you to fill it out. So that was it. Thank you.
Okay, so basically that's all there is to reconciling a bank account. Now, you've entered all of this and you're off down here. What do you do? So there's a couple of things. For reconciliation, check these things. The rule of 3. Look at the difference of your bank account total and your register total and find out what that number is. Say you're off, basically you're off $27. You add 2 plus 7, basically the digits in that number. If that equals a number that is divisible by 3, then basically you have a transposition. You wrote in 72 when you meant to write 27, or you wrote in 27 and you meant to write wrote in 72 and you meant to write 27. It always works. I know when I was explaining this to my husband yesterday, he's going, no. And I said, yes, it does. It works. Trust me, it really does work. If you have something that doesn't work that way, in other words, you've got $183. Let's see. So that would be, no, that's not going to work. $184. And it adds up to 13. Well, then it's not a transposition, it's something else. So the first thing you do is check your ending balances and your register balances and make sure that you've entered those correctly. That's where you're going to find it. Then the next thing I do is I total up the deposits for the month, and they should match the total additions on your bank statement. And if you go back to this, you will see there were basically there was 2 deposits on the bank statement, one for 219 and one for 385. And if you go back to, oops, wrong way. Come on. The register, there was one for 25, one for 94, and one for 385. Now, typically I start with deposits for this reason. Whoops, too far. For this reason, because there's usually, unless you've had a really big event, there's typically less of them. And if my deposits match what's on the bank account, then I know it has to do with my expenses or how something's been entered that way. Then basically what I do is I take the bank statement, and I will check again for the cleared checks to make sure I haven't missed one. Sometimes you're off by $183.43 and you look at register and go, oh, I guess that check didn't clear, and you had marked it cleared. So you enter it and then voila, you balance. Or sometimes, it could be made up of 2 things. The next thing I do is I take the check requests. I ignore the check register. I take my check requests and the bank statement, and I compare the bank statement to the check request. And the reason why you do that is because if you did something in the translation into the check register, this is where you're going to find it. In other words, I'm looking at Bob's check, and it is for $127.33. And I look at the bank statement, but this only says $120.33. Okay, well, then you go back and you actually look at the check to make sure that the bank didn't make a mistake, because they have. I've seen it. I've seen it done. Some people's handwriting isn't very clear. They took a 1 for a 7, or and they didn't read the handwritten one. Then you've got another problem there. And I basically put it in for the amount the bank cleared it, and then find out from there what's going on. And that's a whole nother discussion that we'll have. So that's the other thing you will do. This will also help, basically catch any bank errors. They happen. This is why you need to be looking at your register and your bank statements every month. It's really super important to do that. Even if you didn't have any transactions, I can't stress it enough. You need to be looking at those bank statements every month and logging in and looking at your account. The other thing that needs to happen after you're done and after you've wrapped this all up, and you've got your bank statements, if you have mailed bank statements, and you can get them to your seneschal, those bank statements must be signed by your seneschal. Initialed, whatever. In this day of COVID, or even if all you get are digital, what I do is I send my seneschal every month. I'm the Exchequer for the Barony of Madrona right now, and a couple of other groups. But basically, I send my seneschal copies of the bank statements, and I ask her to review them and email me back telling me that she has reviewed them. Then I print off that email or save it digitally at this case, and basically put that in my file so that when I send my stuff up to Elowen at the end of the quarter, that's there, and she knows, because the corporate is checking this. They're making sure that we're following our own rules. When we're all together, sometimes it's pretty easy to just have them sign the bank statements. Doing it digitally and getting an email makes it a little easier, because then you don't have to scan in the bank statements to send to Elwyn. Not everybody has that capability at home, which is why having digital bank statements is so nice. So, but that's it. That's all it takes to reconcile your bank statement. Any questions? Comments? Pretty straightforward. Crickets? Hello?
Chirp, chirp,
Chirp,
chirp, chirp.
chirp.
Chirp, chirp, chirp.
Does it make sense?
Thank you.
Pretty easy. If you really are having issues, make sure you say something, because if you can't get things registered or get your registered balance, sometimes sometimes that will mean all the difference in you being able to basically balance your report.
And quite, excuse me, quite often,
Sorry.
you could be staring at the issue and you won't see it. So reaching out to somebody else, a second set of eyes who goes, what's that right there? And you go, ah, son of a.
Yep.
So
Yep.
don't be afraid to ask for help.
No, please don't. Please don't. There's a lot of us here who will be happy to be that second set of eyes. So
Yeah, and every
anyway.
now and then the actual form itself will have a formula error too. that
Correct.
Pops up.
And I have found those errors, and I found them for society. They kept telling me that I had something wrong, that I was off and that I did not balance. And she sent me back the report. I said, no, your formula's wrong in this cell. And she went, oh, thank you. Okay, so I'll stop my share. And I think Catherine's up next.
Catherine,
Dun, dun,
who's this
dun.
Catherine
Assets.
speaking of?
Assets.
Assets. Everything your branch owns is owned by the SCA, which is something we sometimes forget. It's really important that we know who has what, especially the big stuff. And there's, whether or not your group actually has a Chamberlain, most groups don't unless they're a big group. I kind of recommend it. Chamberlain is a deputy to an Exchequer. They are the ones who control your inventory, or not necessarily control, but take your inventory, spearhead that, know what assets your group owns. There is a Chamberlain handbook, and Torkel, is that included in our document dump?
Not currently, but it will be by the end of the day.
Okay, good. In there, it's written for the kingdom level, but like everything else, it's easily adaptable to a local level. Your inventory doesn't have to include, how many paper plates you own as loaner stuff, but it should include the stuff you use normally. You also need to know, like I said, who has what. For example, for the Canton of a Corner Beer, I have our 20 by 40 foot dragon wing pavilion at my house. I also have all of our gold key at my house. I think I better go out and double check on this. I'm pretty sure I also have our loaner feast stuff at my house. So back to why it's good to know who has what. There's an actual form, and I can screen share that. This one is specific to, we adapted it for the Barony of Wastekeep. It's really pretty simple. It says, I'm an active member. I have these things. If I should be incapacitated or die, a representative of the barony has the right to make arrangements with my family or guardian to remove this property from my home. And then you list what it is. This is important because there have been actual incidents of people in the SCA who had SCA possessions with them that their family didn't recognize as SCA possessions and fought the local group over returning, or in one case did not return it. And we don't need to get into details. This form will be shared as well. I actually think, feel free to jump in here, folks. I actually think we could use another contact as well, besides the person who has them, maybe, their significant other or whoever that other person is. Their contact wouldn't be bad either.
Yeah.
Or in my case, for example, Neil's contact, so that, you could contact him. You'll have this document, you'll have who to contact, you'll know where stuff is. in the Chamberlain handbook, there's actually a lovely setup of a spreadsheet for a kingdom that lists, the crowns. Where are those located? So it's separate from this, but it says, if the king and queen aren't married, for example, the king has his crown, the queen has her crown. The king has his cloak, the queen has her cloak, and where those things are located so that we can get them back. I'm going to stop screen sharing because this can come out as well in the documents.
And if you have possessions in your home, you should be a blue card member.
You must be a blue card member. That is very important. This will include, these assets can include local regalia. Our barony has some cloaks that it gives out. The rapier champion for the barony has a rapier that I don't think we can get back, can we, Torquil? Because it's in Canada.
Yes, the rapier is in Canada. However, the axe is in my living room.
There's a rapier axe?
No, the axe is for defenestrator, but
Oh,
they didn't
yes.
feel comfortable taking that across the border.
Oh, well, yeah, that might raise an eyebrow or two at the border crossing.
For those who don't know, it's an executioner's axe, not like I'm gonna go out and play in the field axe, but like a full-on executioner's axe.
I'm just remembering the time you and I crossed with your rapier gear and the border guard was really interested in it and actually drew the sword to the point where the people in the car behind us are like, what the hell is that? So anyway, all of our assets belong to the SCA proper, just like our money does. I mean, you may be responsible for your groups, but it all technically belongs to the SCA property. If a group is going to close, and this has happened recently, those assets need to be gathered. We had a discussion recently about this. If your group is going to truly, truly close down and not just take a little break, you can distribute your assets to other groups within the kingdom or within the SCA. And that means that the Kingdom Exchequer doesn't have to go physically get those assets from your group, which they would appreciate very much. However, if you haven't done that, then the Kingdom Exchequer will come and gather those assets and put them into storage for a period of, is it 2 years, Elowen? Yeah.
Yes, it's essentially 2 years. It could be extended if it appears that a push is being made and you guys aren't there yet. But honestly, do your kingdom a favor and please find other homes for your stuff if we ever get to that point. Thanks.
Exactly.
What she's saying is do Elowen a favor because she has had to deal with that this year.
Yes.
I have, sadly, we've had a few branches that haven't survived. I don't want to say it wasn't necessarily related to the shutdown. I think the shutdown just kind of put the nail in the coffin. They were really struggling beforehand.
Yeah.
And in those cases, oftentimes, if a branch is imploding, sometimes there's only one officer left to help me close things out. Yeah. So please do get rid of your stuff. I don't want to save all of your dirty dishes. And that is some of the stuff that I was given to save.
That's right. See, I for some reason, this discussion always reminds me of George Carlin's skit about having too much. Well, he doesn't say stuff, but, and it's like, it just reminds me that should play in our heads. On the other hand, when the Shire of Ambergard decided to close their doors, they contacted the local branches around the inlands and donated stuff, including money, to those local branches. So it was gone. One of the things that came up during that was that some of the stuff that the branch, we always said, oh yeah, that's Ambergard's. Turned out it wasn't Ambergard's, it was somebody's personal property. Now they all knew this, and this included, I think even the castle was somebody's personal property that they just always used. But then those people could decide, do I want my castle back? Or do we want to donate that to somebody else? Because, if it's yours, you haul it around. So these are things to look at. And another good reason to have a copy of the SCA possessions in the home so that you know for sure that these possessions are those. Conversely, although it's not up to you, the Exchequer, or you, the Chamberlain, to track it, if you know that you have personal possessions of other people that you're using that are maybe stashed with your SCA stuff, make note of that. That yes, we have a castle, but it belongs to Elowen personally, it's her castle, that type of thing, so that we know, so that if somebody else had to take over your job who maybe didn't know, it's written down. So really, this is the Chamberlain is the record keeper, the one who says, not so much money, but stuff. What's ours, what's somebody else's, and where it is. And then if we use that SCA possessions in the home form, the one in the Chamberlain handbook actually says, I think it says loan. I'm looking it up right now. Yeah, it says personal property loan agreement, and it refers to it as a loan. You have this temporarily on loan. That's another language that we could use to describe personal property that other people have. And it gives us a way to find it and get it back if we need to, so that we don't have people buried in the regalia of our branch as opposed to stuff that's not theirs. This is real quick and simple. I also want to, when we're talking about Chamberlains, because the Chamberlain handbook also talks about the Teamster. You know, there's a Kingdom Teamster. Those are two separate jobs. Just because you're the Chamberlain and you know where stuff is, that doesn't mean you're required to move said stuff for an event. My husband's not in the room, which is good, because he had very strong thoughts on having stuff here. Matter of fact, I got a new vehicle and trailer out of it because he said, I don't want, you're not towing the Baronial trailer anymore. So just make sure that the Chamberlain knows that even if that trailer's stashed on their property, or if somebody else has property to stash it, that doesn't mean they have to be the Teamster and move it. So those are also clear things to keep in mind when you're looking at assets. If it is on your depreciation schedule, you better have track of it, or get it off, the schedule eventually if it's gone. Your local group, your financial policy can specify what needs to be tracked closely. Like I said, paper plates, probably not. But if you have a lot of other loaner gear that you want back, things that you would like to see come back, yes. Regalia, yes. Tents, obviously. Although, it's lived here a long time. So, questions, anybody, about assets? Additions from those of you who deal with assets? Nobody has a thought.
So I had begun and I still need to dedicate some time on the computer for all the data entry. I'd begun a photo inventory, so that, again, if something is damaged or lost, then we could either recreate said option, or at least have a better visual, other than people remembering, oh, that used to look like whatever. So we can have actual pictures worth 1,000 words, right? So it helps when you're describing something if you've got a picture of it.
Yes.
So trying to get a digital file put together of the pictures I've taken so far, but so that it's a little easier too when doing inventory to go, oh yeah, that's a new thing, or that's damaged and we need it. So.
Perfect. And if you can get a deputy under you to do it, let them. Perfect. Marcia.
Insurance.
I can cover that if you don't have it, Catherine.
Yeah, go for it. It's
so it depends on the
It's
insurance.
complicated.
It is
very
complicated. I actually Blathenor was actually a member of the My Trailer Got Stolen Club. So Asa, taking photos of everything, absolutely. That is something I know I need to get on the Chamberlain about if we haven't done that yet. And a photo of the trailer if you have a trailer. After that,
showing the license plate.
Yes. After that happened, we found out that that corporate insurance does not cover our belongings in our storage unit or our trailer. So we went, and I actually went to an insurance agent, the one that handles the one for my home, and said, I need help with this. How can we do this and get this stuff covered and get it priced out and what we need to do? I need to cover the contents in the trailer, and I need to cover the contents in the storage unit. I think that insurance runs us It's on the expensive side, but they take the tax ID number and everything and they run it as the 501c3. But I think it covers if anything gets stolen again. It's up to like $5,000 or more.
Hey,
It's
Kira,
a lot.
doesn't that include your cornets?
Yeah, no, it does not. The
Okay.
cornets need to be
That's
covered
important to note.
under when the cornets are covered under the Baron and Baroness's homeowners or renters insurance when they take control of those.
Right. We tried to insure the Baronial and the Kingdom cornets, and just a single year's worth of insurance coverage costs more than the cost of the circlets and the crowns themselves. So it's not worth it.
So one of the things that I did on the Kingdom side was when the trailer is being towed, liability coverage is provided by the towing vehicle. You need to make sure your Teamsters are aware of that as well. But as far as ensuring the contents of the trailer, and Kingdom doesn't have a storage unit. We store most of our event-related stuff inside trailers.
Yep, we do.
I got an inland marine policy to cover the contents up to $40,000, and it costs $500 a year.
That's about what it is.
And that is inland marine is the name of the type of policy that you would want if you're trying to insure things that are stored inside of a trailer. It was, I couldn't find, I was beating my head against the wall going to agent after agent. I tried to explain it. I get halfway through and I could tell they thought I was a freak and never returned my calls. It actually took a company in Monroe, and the gal there had been to Ursulmus, and she remembered us and she was super excited to help out. But that's how I was able to get it in place. But one of the things to ask yourself as a branch is, if you're going to spend $500 a year insuring this stuff, what is the value? You've got just some plastic tables and a couple of handmade thrones. Is it worth $500? What about 4 years from now? Well, now you've spent $2,000.
Right.
So these are all things to think about and discuss amongst your financial committee as to if it makes sense. When I was the Exchequer for Aquaterra, their stuff is in a storage unit and it's public storage, and public storage actually provides insurance for the contents. So for $8 a month, I think it is still $8 a month, actually, they insure their contents that way. So that might be something to look into as well.
It depends on the insurance for the public storage, because you can do without a deductible. It's like a little bit more, like $17 a month onto your storage. We decided to go with the inland because we did store our stuff in the trailer and in the storage unit, and it covers both. And because our trailer was stolen directly out of the storage unit that we had used for almost 14 years.
So was Aquaterra's, stolen directly from the storage facility where we had it stored. Thankfully, there wasn't much in there and we got it back. So we lucked out there.
One thing I want to remind everybody, if you have your Chamberlain and they are going to be towing your trailer, and they have picked up the rider for their insurance, you can reimburse them for the difference in the insurance policy. It's usually not very much, but if that, if it's a deterrent from having your Chamberlain being willing to do it, you can reimburse them for the difference.
So, and just so you know, living in farm country, when Neil contacted our insurance agency to see about getting a rider for towing somebody else's trailer, the agent just had this, couldn't comprehend the concept. Why would you need that? You tow stuff all the time. What? No, there's no rider. You're covered. Don't worry about it. But he was just like, but that's because of where we are. And yes, we do tow stuff all the time. So, but I don't think you're going to get that if you live in the heart of Seattle, So we did, though. Any other questions on assets?
Oh, Elena's got her hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to make the point that if at all possible, and this is something that Tir has slid over the last couple of years, is when your branch is having its championships, have the form right then and there and get that person, your new champion, before they leave.
Yes.
Because otherwise it can be difficult, or there could be something strange like a pandemic, and now you haven't seen that person and they've had the Tir rapier stuff for a year
or more.
Yeah. So just a thought.
Thank you.
So
Next
add
question.
that form to our Exchequer gatebox list of forms to have.
Yes.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Are archives a asset? Paper archives?
Yes.
I would treat them as if they were.
Yeah.
Even if they have
Listen-
no real monetary
I don't think
value.
that they're not. There's no monetary value to your paper records, right? So I don't think they're an asset per se. However, you should be preserving them as if they are, because we would need to preserve our records. The IRS requires us to retain records for 7 years.
So I would say it's because it's not technically an asset, but it would be a good idea to track that. Who has those records? And again, it wouldn't hurt to have a form that says these records belong to the SCA. If I kick, there you go. Trent has all the records.
This is Amber Card's records
Yay.
that they sent to me right after the last 12th night, because she was going to bring them 12th night, but she forgot them. And I was going to take them to King Norton Sciences, but then Ellen didn't go to King Norton Sciences, so I was going to bring them to May Crown last year, and
That didn't
Crown
happen.
last year didn't happen. Nor did July
Yes,
coronation, September
Well, I
coronation.
know they're in safe hands.
Yes, so now Christina knows where
This is
Amber
my
Card's
my
records
SCA
are.
lost and found pile is right here next to me.
Anyway, but yeah, that is an excellent idea, because I know when I first became seneschal down in Cornebere, and I said, where are our records, assuming they'd have like a little file box or something to give me, or at least a couple file folders. I got 3 pieces of paper, and I'm like, so like minutes and stuff. I had to recreate it all. So it's good to know who has those things, and now we can do a lot of it digitally if we don't have to have it in paper. But yes, excellent question, Marcia.
I have on our asset sheets, like the Herald has got boxes of books. So we don't have them listed out, but it does say, 3 boxes of books for researching heraldic stuff. I have 2 boxes for NMR that I need to go through, or NMS that I need to go through and purge with LON. And then when the baronial stuff comes back to me, 2 boxes full of, dating back to whatever date we keep. That way, if anything happens to me, my husband knows these need to go back to Kingdom and these need to go back to Barony.
So I've got 4 more minutes before I have to sign off. What else do I need to know?
Who you're going to be
Don't
paired with to
panic.
help you out.
And there'll be another training in April. That you need to know.
Yes.
And the date and time of that training is?
We have not decided yet, I don't
Ah.
believe.
We aren't that together. Sorry.
Well, if you need any help doing that, I do it professionally.
Right. All right. And Marcia, I think
Volunteer,
Elena
I'm just saying.
decided that she's going to be your direct contact for that training, for both Greta and for Marcia. So Terry Exchequer is going to handle that. And then I, of course, will be back up if you need any other help as well. So thank you, Marcia, for joining us.
You're welcome.
And then there's always a Facebook group. If you're not on a Facebook group, look it up on Tir Exchequers. We're all there for questions.
You can tell we like to talk about what we do. So we're here.
Is the upcoming training going to be similar to what this was, or will it be different?
Basically, I think the next one we're covering the quarterly report in depth.
Yeah, we're going to do a deep dive into it, more of the, how-tos.
Basically,
Okay, because Eleanor, who joined us, is actually going to be my deputy. Yay! There's a light at the end of the tunnel. I might get to do a different job.
Yeah.
So-
Basically, we thought we would break it down a little more because the report is so intensive. We didn't want to overwhelm people.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Did we have any more questions? I don't think we had any more topics, right?
Yeah, you were going to cover seneschals and.
Oh, yeah. And I kind of,
why don't you just do a touch basis and we'll cover the next time?
yeah,
since we
yeah.
need to
So
wrap
I
it
had
up.
a big presentation, but then when I compare my presentation to what everything you guys had done, I realized I would just be repeating everything. So, essentially, as exchequers, you need to consider your seneschal as your best friend. You two should be working together. you know, hopefully you're never at odds. And that doesn't mean that you won't always agree. It's perfectly okay, especially in your financial committee, to not agree to a thing. But you know, in the essence of people get funny about money. They absolutely do. In these areas, you do want to work closely with your exchequer, or I mean, with your seneschal. The last thing you want is your seneschal getting funny about money because they don't feel that you've communicated well to them. So definitely make sure that they're in your loop, understand they are a valued part of your financial committee. For groups without coronets, you and the seneschal are pretty much the leaders of your financial committee and could be it, you know, and you're the primary decision makers for your group. So it's equally important to foster a good relationship, keep communication going, share those bank statements regularly. What I tell seneschals when I meet with them is that they are ultimately responsible. They're just as responsible for the bank statements and the banking activity as the exchequer, and they are expected to be looking into this, following up. They should be, reinforce that they should be signing off on those bank statements monthly. And there's almost always a little bit of panic from somebody who hasn't been getting them monthly, and so we talk about best practices moving forward, things like that. So it really is important to dial your seneschal in, make sure that you're sharing those bank statements, make sure that your seneschal understands financial policy, and that you guys are all speaking the same language. So, I think that was pretty much it.
And one more thing, they are not the boss of you.
Oh, yeah.
Elowen is the boss of you. No.
Yeah, and this is where you guys work together, and that's the
Correct.
whole key thing here is they aren't the boss of you. Their function is to wrangle the legal side of things while you wrangle the financial side of things, working together. So.
If I could add something to that,
Thank you.
When I was a new baronial exchequer, the barony was in a council meeting wanting to spend money on something that is specifically disallowed. It sounds heartless, but when someone has a family member pass away, you cannot use SCA funds to send them flowers. And the baron and baroness and the seneschal and everybody in the room wanted to do it, and I refused to sign the check and said, no, I am going to bring this up with, at the time there was no principality, so I'm going to bring this up with Kingdom. And I did. I went home and I emailed Kingdom, because if I had signed that check, I would have been doing something wrong. And so it's not our money, but we're the last safeguard to make sure they're not doing something wrong. And sometimes that means check with principality, check with Kingdom. Somebody above us will have the answer.
I had the same thing come up from a honey war. His Excellency of Glumir fell on the field and broke his leg, and the Baron of Blethenor at that point in time wanted to send him, a get well thing and a care package. And I looked at him and said, you can take up donations for it. I can't sign it. And if you're not getting a backup and you're getting an argument, that's when you can bring in your Kingdom Exchequer, or like Elena said, if you're a principality, bring in your principality exchequer, or even a more knowledgeable exchequer that's been doing it for a while and can point out to you exactly where you can find it in the rules.
Yeah. Sometimes, people think with their hearts, and we're here to think with our heads.
It's called personal gain, just so that people know that.
Right.
Thank you for coming.
Marcia.
Bye-bye. Thank you. This has been fun. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Well, anything else? Anybody?
General questions?
I actually have a question about the SCA ledger that they provide, which I do not use because the last time I checked it, I could not add sufficient budget items to run the principalities' financial transactions through it. I was told that there was going to be maybe some sort of password version of it where you could enter a password and that would let you enter more. And I never saw an improvement on it, so I don't use it. Is there any further development on that?
Not that I've heard of.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's funny. I tried to help a branch checker who was using that form, and I don't know if she broke it or who broke it, but we couldn't even get the report of the category totals to print. So I basically took her books and entered them all into an old spreadsheet that I used to use with an integrated ledger and had her balanced in 2 hours. Thank God there wasn't a lot of activity due to COVID. But the poor thing was beating her head against the wall trying to get this thing to work for her, and it wasn't. So, there are a couple of versions of ledger formats that people can use that I think are better than the one on the society webpage.
I've got one that I wrote my first time around, which
Mhm.
was 2000, I think was the first Exchequer office I ever had. This is 2021. I still use the same form. Of course, it's been upgraded since then, but yeah, it's the one I use. I just thought I'd check.
The one in the link that I sent earlier in the chat is the my go-to. And it was the one that Ilonda was doing before she stepped up as Society Exchequer. And it has the changes that Society wanted for depreciation, I think.
And donations.
Yeah, maybe.
It's donations.
Yeah, it's got an early copy, but it has the formula that they want. So
I need to check out. See you later.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Ansgar.
It was nice to see you.
So one of the things that I found is that when there are branches that are having a hard time balancing, in almost all cases, it's because they've got some weird ledger system that they're using that doesn't equate and doesn't quite give all the information they need to fill out the report, whether it's a brainchild of their own or it was passed to them by the prior exchequer. And 9 times out of 10, in order for me to balance their books, I take it all out of that ledger and I put it in one of our SCA ledger forms or an integrated report. So I'm almost inclined to want to start new exchequers out with using a report format that automatically integrates the journal. I think it's just easier.
It's easier because half the time, half of that journal entry backfills in the rest of the report. So you're only having to, you're not doing transcription errors or, weird lookups from one to the other.
I need to check out. I've got to make sure my chickens are flying by choice and not by wind.
Okay.
Take care, Lily. It was wonderful.
It's good seeing you all.
Bye, Lily.
See you soon.
Bye, Lily. See you soon.
That's funny.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? Because I kind of need to check out too. I should probably go check on my chickens. It's awful windy out there.
Yes, it is.
Am I the only one that got rid of the chicken coop when I moved into my house?
I've still got 3.
You don't have chickens.
And only 2 of them lay. I don't know why I hang on to
Okay.
Was it your
Well,
baby?
you guys, I think we're done and we'll do it again in April, right?
Yep.
Right.
So we're probably looking at the end of April, definitely.